Okay, so first we're going to import the reference image we're going to use for the glass bottle, which is what we'll start with. So let's do that. Okay, so let's open up the reference image we're going to use, which is this glass bottle that I just found on Google. And just start modeling the silhouette. Of it. So Shift A to open up the add tool, and we're going to start with a cylinder. And I'm going to toggle my X-ray mode so I can see through the shape. And just start modeling the silhouette. This image isn't the most clearest image, but yeah, just go to Google and you can find images of bottles. It's clear enough to get the silhouette though. I'm just going to slightly move this over so it's centered. And scale this down just a little bit. Let's just start modeling the silhouette of it. Don't have to worry about too many details at this stage. Just focus on getting the silhouette. The most important thing is that we give this bottle some thickness so that it looks realistic when we add liquid materials or liquid mesh inside and we add our glass material. So for now, I'm just going to make sure our edges have enough geometry. So when we smooth this out, it'll be nice and smooth. Alright, so let's get this little section here, the inside of the glass. So to do that, I'm just pressing I on my keyboard to inset these faces. To sort of create this like shape, the shape in the center here. So I'm just pressing I, then I'm just pressing G to bring this up. I'll bring it up to about here, because on the reference image, the camera is being shot from an orthographic perspective, so we have to use our own judgment here. And I'm just going to kind of bevel these edges to give it a little bit more shape. There we go. And then we always want to make sure we never have shapes like this. So I'm just gonna go to vertex mode and press M, and we're gonna merge these vertices at the center. I'm gonna do the same thing for the top. I'm gonna inset the faces so we have, actually, before we do that, I'll actually give this bottle some thickness because we want to make sure we have thickness on the bottle. So let's do that first. So I'm going to click on add modifier and we'll search for solidifier, and we will solidify this bottle. I usually like to do 0.1, but you can go as far as you feel like you need to go. I say anything between 0.1 and 0.5 is pretty decent, depending on how thick you think the glass is. But it's nice to have a good amount of thickness between the inside and the outside of the bottle so that the liquid can go in between. So I'd say 0.5 is pretty decent. I'm going to go ahead and apply that. And let's take a look and see. Because what we're going to do is use this inside we're going to duplicate this to create our liquid material, or our liquid substance, our liquid mesh. So I want to make sure there's enough thickness between the inside and the outside of the bottle. Okay, so now we can go ahead and select this face and delete it. Let's take a look. So this will be the top of our bottle. I'm going to go ahead and drag these edges up to match with this. Then I'll just bridge these together. So I just right clicked on my mouse to open up this menu, and then I'm clicking bridge edge loops to bridge these edge loops together. We're ready to create the liquid. So to create the liquid, I like to select the inside of the bottle, but first I create a seam here so I can easily separate the inside from the outside of the bottle. So I'm right clicking my mouse and I'm clicking mark seam. I'm going to face select, and I'm going to select all the faces inside the bottle, and I'm pressing Shift S or Shift D to duplicate this. I'm pressing P on my keyboard to separate this selection from the bottle, and this is what our liquid substance will be. Now, depending on how much liquid's in your bottle, you can adjust this accordingly. The thing you want to make sure you do is have the liquid sitting in between the inside and the outside of the bottle. So I'm pressing Alt S on my keyboard to scale this in between the inside and the outside of the bottle, and I'm doing this along the normals because if we just scale this with just S, it's going to scale it this way, which, you know, so I'm pressing Alt S to scale it this way. There's your liquid. So we can go ahead and rename this, call it liquid, call this bottle, and there you have it. Just a basic, simple model of a bottle. Alright, so now we're going to make sure there's enough edge loops, because when we go to solidify this and smooth it out, it's going to collapse these edges. So we want to make sure we have enough support along these edges. So I'm going to add a couple edge loops around here and here and here and one down here. And maybe one here. Alright. And now we'll come over here to add a modifier, and we'll add our subdivision surface. Alright. So you can see we're kind of losing some of our shape. And so we may have to come in here and add a couple more edge loops to support. I'm pressing Control R to activate this edge loop. There we go. And we can right click our mouse to open up the object selection, and I'm pressing Shade Smooth, and that's going to smooth out our bottle. Okay, so just adding a couple more supporting edges in certain areas. And if we feel like we need to add, you know, any supporting edges, we can do so. But this is the basics of how to model a glass bottle. Do is the liquid. So we'll add one to our liquid as well. I'll subdivide it twice, and I'll come in here and add some supporting edge loops to sort of to support these edges. And then I'm going to close the top by pressing F. Then I'm going to press I to inset these faces. And then I'm going to go M at center. And that'll give us our liquid material, our liquid mesh. To go inside the bottle. Okay, so there you have it. And now we're going to move on to the materials, and we're going to give this bottle some nice glass material. Okay, so I forgot to add a cap for this bottle, so I'm just going to quickly model a cap. So to do that, I will duplicate this, press P to separate it. I'll call it top. I'm going to select these vertices, scale them in, or scale them. Okay, so now I'm going to work on my materials. So start with a glass material for the bottle. I'm going to Shift A to search for an add-on, and we're going to search for light path. We're going to search for math, transparent, mix shader. So we're going to mix between our transparent material or transparent shader and our principled shader. I'm going to plug this in. I'm going to change my add to greater than. I'm going to plug in my light path. I'm going to plug in my ray length, plug it into the value, and I'm going to change this to about 6.5. I'm going to plug my value into this and plug this in here. And this is going to give us a glass material. So before we can get into any sort of texturing or anything, we have to unwrap our bottle. So a very quick way to do that, I'm just going to select it. You can see Blender tries to create a pre-made UV map for us, but we want to have a little bit more control over where things go, since we'll be creating a texture for this. We'll need to decide now where our texture is going to go on this bottle. So let's say we want to place our label right here in the center, maybe something like this, you know. So I'll add a couple edge loops to show where this label is going to be placed. And then I will select these faces to kind of carve out a UV map for this, because this is where our label is going to go. And we want to make it easy to know where things are going to go. So let's say the label goes here, right? This is where we want our label to be placed, and then it'll be a lot easier for us to texture. So I'm just going to kind of unwrap this. I'm going to use cylindrical projection or cylinder projection. I'm going to click this to change the direction of the projection. And if you don't already have text tools, I can put a link to it in the description of this video, so you can download it, because this makes the UV process a lot easier. But I'm going to click on that and I'm going to fill my shape with this. And this is going to give us a lot of flexibility when we create our design. We can simply export this UV map, and it'll be easier for us to create that. Select the bottle. So this part of the bottle is this section. So I'll do another cylindrical projection like that, and then this is the bottom of the bottle. It's the inside and the outside of the bottle. So now we have our bottle unwrapped. We'll move on to some materials now, and yeah, let's do it. So to see this glass material in effect, I'm going to go to my render mode, and we're going to change our background to a black background or a white background. So we can choose between a white background or a black one. I like using the black one. I'm going to turn all this off. I'm going to set up some lights so we can see what this glass is starting to look like. So I just like to use a plane. the most important thing here with lighting is that we always use gradient lights because it gives a lot of nice contrast. Because if we use just a plain emission light, it's going to look very flat. So I always go for gradient light. So I'm going to open up my image. If you have like a gradient image, you can do that, or you can create a gradient texture and then you can plug it into emission, and that'll give you a nice gradient texture. Alright, so we're starting to see some things here. So this is what the linear gradient looks like, which is what I typically use for glass renderings. Okay, so I'm going to start with we're going to have our key light and our fill light, and then we want to have some nice edge lighting or a nice backlight to show the liquid. So I'm going to start with maybe the backlight. For the backlight, I like to use a spherical light, but like I said, you can do whatever you want, or you can use whatever type of lights you want, but I like to use spherical lights in the back to show the liquid a little bit more better. So I'm going to do that, and you may have to adjust the position. So I'm going to add a mapping and texture coordinate to adjust the position of this light. So I'm going to scale it down just a little bit, and then we can move it up, move it in position, and this will give us a nice little light to go in the back. And then we can scale this up if we want. Alright, you can change the color of it. You can do whatever you want, with it, but this is just a typical way that I like to light my bottles. So yeah, now if you want more control over this light, you can add a color ramp, and that'll give you more control over that. You can change this to ease or B-spline, whatever you want. We're going to add some more lights, so I'm going to duplicate this light and just rotate it around. And now we're going to add some other lights. And to make this glass material show up a little bit better, we have to come down to our principled material and we have to turn up the transmission. And as you can see, our glass material is starting to show up. Okay. As for the liquid material, it's pretty simple. I'm going to turn the IOR to 1.3. Turn the roughness all the way down, and turn the transmission up. I'm going to change this light to a linear light. So we can get some nice highlights going down the side of the bottle. So once again, I put a strong emphasis on gradient lighting because it adds contrast. I want to show you what happens if we don't use gradient lighting. So I'm going to unplug this, and you can see without the gradient light, it gives us this really harsh, flat light here. And it just doesn't add any contrast, to the bottle. So you see what happens when we take away that gradient. It looks very flat. So I'm going to add that back, and you can see when we add the gradient lights, it gives our bottle a nice contrast. So I want to make these lights nice and big. make sure it fills up the whole, the whole bottle, and make sure they're nice and big. Okay. I'm gonna grab a camera so we can see what this render is going to start to look like. So I'm gonna press 0 to go into my camera view, and I'm gonna lock it to the view, and I'm gonna scale this out. And just keep working on our lights and our materials for the rest of the bottle. Okay, so now we're going to do the rest of the lights. You don't always have to have 3 lights. I find that sometimes just having 2 lights works just as good as having 3. It really depends on what you're trying to create and how you want this to look. So for the glass material, you actually want to use the ray depth and not ray length. So that was a mistake on my part. But that should get you the nice glassy material. There you have it. And now we're ready to start to give this some textures. I'm going to give my top material. For now, I'll just go with a black top for the bottle. We'll change the color later, or we'll give the top some textures later. But for now, I'll just go with that to keep it simple. So now we're going to create the water simulation to create that splash effect that hits the back of the bottle. So I'll add a box or a cube, and I'll scale it up. Make sure there's enough space for the water to simulate, so we can scale this up quite a bit. And then just make sure it's centered here. And now we need to create a domain. I'm also going to add a sphere for the liquid to simulate from. So sphere, and we'll scale that down quite a bit. And we'll move it here. Add modifier. I'm sure there's a way you can do this with geometry nodes as well, but this is what I'm familiar with doing, so here we go. Particle physics, fluid, domain. Okay, we're going to change this to liquid. Depending on your computer, you may have to keep this number low. I usually start off with 60. I think 64 is pretty good for my computer, but if you have a really good computer, you can increase this number quite a bit. But I'll test out 32 just to see what it looks like, and then we'll gradually increase this number. We can keep our border collisions on for now. Gonna come down here and select the mesh that we want. We want to select mesh. Don't have to mess with all these settings here. I'm going to change this to modular. Okay, and when we select modular, this bake data option will show. So that'll give us the cue to start to bake our simulation. I'm going to select the sphere, go to fluid, flow, because this is where the liquid will flow from. I'm going to change this to liquid. I'm going to choose inflow to add fluid to the simulation. You can increase the sampling size to improve the quality of the fluid. I'm going to select initial velocity, and I'm going to change it to, you can adjust the velocity of the liquid. I usually do like -5 or 10. And then we'll bake the simulation. So I'll reselect my box and we will bake this data. It's complete, and you can see our particles have showed up, our fluids have showed up. We may have to increase the resolution, but let's see what it's starting to look like. Okay, I'm going to select my bottle, and I want to make sure we add a collision to our bottle so that it hits our bottle. So I'm going to click on collision. I'm also going to click on collision. Excuse me. I'm going to click on effector. I'm going to click on fluid and then click on effector, not collision. So yes, fluid, and we'll change this to effector. Make sure we choose as is planar, because it'll hit the bottle. And now let's rebake that simulation. So I'm going to free data and I'm going to rebake. Okay, so that's done. Now let's see. As you can see, the particles are colliding with the bottle, which is what we want. So now we can adjust the particles to make it look like a splash. So to do that, we'll okay, so after playing around with some of the particle settings, this is what we ended up with. Alright, so now we're going to export the UV maps we mentioned earlier, and we're going to import these into Photoshop and Illustrator so we can create a texture. So export UV layout, and we'll just save this to our location. Okay, so now we're going to create our texture. I like to start with a 3000 by 3000 pixel image to get the best quality, and I just simply create one. And yeah, so this is our canvas, and I have a title for the name of this bottle that I'm going to use, so I'll simply just go ahead and start working on the texture. Okay, so now we're going to copy and paste this design into Photoshop. And what we want to do is change this to white because I want to turn this into a mask, so it's easy for us to change the colors of this, and we'll be able to adjust like the colors of things in Blender without having to do it in here in Photoshop and Illustrator, so we won't have to come back and change colors if we need to, because we can do all of that within Blender. So I'm going to change this to white, and I'm going to change the strokes to white as well. Okay, so what I ended up doing was just creating another material for this section. Now we're just going to import some paper textures to make this look more realistic, to make this paper look more like paper. So to do that, we'll import some paper textures. You can go to quixel.com to find like different textures. Going to add a normal map and place my normal map for this texture and change this to UV map. And we can start to preview how our texture is looking. You can see the paper texture. We can increase this to 5 if we want to be able to see it better. But this just adds a little realism to our design, or a bottle. Now I'm going to add the roughness map. Oh, and don't forget to change this to non-color, or else it won't show up correctly. So now I add the roughness map. You can see it showing up there. And I'll add the roughness. Then I'll also change the color of it to like a blue, which is what our reference is showing. Alright, so there's our paper texture, our paper. So now we need to add the mask that we created earlier. So we'll do that all on this layer, or in this material. So what I'll do is rename this, and I'll call it paper. And now we're going to add some mask on top of this to create our design. So the masks that we created earlier, we're simply just going to import those. So let's start with the text. No, actually, let's start with the design. Let's add a mix shader. Okay, so let's duplicate, or let's just add another principled shader so we can change the color of our mask. You can see the mask generating here. We will have to adjust the UVs a little bit to get this to not stretch as much, so we may have to manually adjust that. But let's plug this in, and we're going to make it gold. Now we're going to mix between the first mask and the second mask. Alright, there you can see our second layer has been applied. As I mentioned, it is stretching quite a bit, so we will have to make adjustments. Let's plug that in. I'll just duplicate this again. So as you can see, this process is quite repetitive. It's just a matter of you stacking materials together and stacking images together to create a label. And this is a much easier than having to constantly go back into Photoshop and make adjustments or iterations to a design. It's much easier to just do everything in one program. Now we'll plug this in. They're stretching quite a bit. So we may have to manually, there we go, there's our label. We can change the color of that mask to make it gold. And that's it. So for the top, I want this part to be orange. So I'm going to change it to orange. Being able to make these type of iterations is very nice in the production process, and because if you have to keep going back into Photoshop, it takes a lot longer. But since we created a mask for everything, it makes it a lot easier to be able to make these changes. Okay, so let's say we want to have our top just look something like this, and we have the text going around it like that. So I'll go back into my camera view and we'll adjust the camera angle to get something similar to this. So I'll just simply rotate the camera like that. We might want to scale up our background a little bit, and just a matter of me moving my camera around to get the angle that we want here. So let's start modeling the wedges for those lines that go around the bottle. So in the line, so I'll scale that in a little bit. I'll just kind of create these wedges. Little wedge. Now we'll add the textures. I'm going to separate the skin from the inside of the wedge or the lime. I'm going to assign a new material to this section so it has its own material. Just make it green for right now until we add our textures. Bit from view so it's easier to project onto the reference here, and just kind of move stuff around here. There's our little wedges. And we can make a normal map, and we can make a roughness map out of this wedge and Photoshop, and we can place it on here. So I'm going to do that, but let's add the texture for the skin. Texture here for the skin piece. But there you have it. Just the skin texture to use for add a normal map. Roughness, and there it is. There's the skin for our wedge. Now we're going to place these all around our bottle. Manually move these around ourselves, so but that is another way you could do it. But I'm just going to kind of drag these into the positions we want them to be in. And there you have it, folks. Simple visualization of a bottle. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. And yeah, stay tuned for more content like this. Don't forget to subscribe, and you can drop a comment if you are interested in seeing more product visualization tutorials like this. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.